Batman the Animated Series is definitely considered one of, if not the best superhero shows that we have ever gotten. And a very large reason for that being the case is the types of stories that they were able to tell in a kid's show really were immaculate and set the tone for the entire DCAU. They gave us great comic book storylines, they gave us great dark storylines, but they also showed us a different part of Batman. They humanized him, they showed us the humanity within the Bat. And not only that, but they also showed us the toll that being Batman took on Bruce Wayne. And for a lot of us fans, we love to see that. So when this show ended up getting a sequel called The New Adventures of Batman, a lot of people were really excited and expecting a lot. However, the series only got one season, which seemed odd considering how well Batman the Animated Series was received. And not only that, how well received Superman the Animated Series was. And Batman was the hero that crossed over in that universe the most. So it seemed very odd that this series only got one season. However, the reason behind it does make a lot of sense. But that being said, it still makes a lot of us super nerds wonder what could have been. And that brings me to today's video, because today we're talking The New Adventures of Batman Season 2, What Could Have Been. But before we get into anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Alright, The New Adventures of Batman Season 2. So this is a really interesting one because we don't have any confirmed details for what a Season 2 would have looked like. Now, the reason behind this is because they were in development for Batman Beyond, and not only that, they were starting pre-production for Justice League. So all in all, considering how well those shows were received and how much I personally enjoyed those shows, I can't say that I would have preferred a second season of this Batman series. However, it still sucks that we never got anything more, especially because it is Kevin Conroy. So obviously I personally am going to want more of Kevin Conroy's Batman. And not only that, we also got Nightwing in this series, and the inclusion of the Bat family in this series was the best of any show in my opinion. I know a lot of shows like the 2005 The Batman series or even Batman Brave and the Bold did dabble in including the Bat family. However, to me, they never got it absolutely perfect, where in this universe, to me, I wouldn't have changed a thing, at least anything on screen. Some of the off-screen stuff between Batgirl, Nightwing, and Batman, we can leave all of that. However, if you want to see those details, check out my other video titled Downfall of the Dynamic Duo. But talking specifically about The New Adventures of Batman, I feel like there were so many different storylines that we could have seen. And not only that, so many different characters that we could have had introduced. And I just want to run through a couple and run through some of the storylines we could have seen. So first and foremost, the first one that comes to mind is a contracted to kill type of storyline. We obviously know that the Penguin by this point was in charge of the Iceberg Lounge and was starting to go down a route of legitimacy. However, that was only in the public view. Behind the scenes, he was still very much so involved in nefarious activities. So him putting out some type of contract for assassins to go after Batman would have been really, really cool. We could have seen Batman go up against characters like Lady Shiva, Deathstroke, or Deadshot. This would have been cool for many reasons. First and foremost, I have wanted Lady Shiva in a Batman project for so long, and we barely get her in anything that is Batman centric. There was some movie a couple years ago, however, it was Batman Tales of the Dragon or something like that, and it was absolutely horrible. But the high points in that movie were anything to do with Lady Shiva. So that being said, if we got Lady Shiva in some capacity in a second season of The New Adventures of Batman, that would have been really, really cool. Or even if you don't do a contracted to kill storyline, you could have still included her and had her be heading up an organization in Gotham, one that Batman is starting to be aware of. You can even have her tie back to the roots of Batman and the people that Batman was trained by. So this could give Batman a personal connection to the main villain, have her be the overarching villain for that season, and that could give us a really, really good story to follow. And not only that, you could have her interact with the Bat family, have her face off against Nightwing, against Robin, and against Batgirl. That could be really cool to see. You could get not only great character interactions, but also some really cool fights. Specifically, Nightwing versus Lady Shiva would be really cool. I feel like their fighting styles would offer some really, really good combat to see see on screen. That being said, another character that I personally think that the DCAU as a whole totally missed with was Deathstroke. And I'm someone who constantly praises the DCAU. So the fact that I have this much of an issue with how they handled, or rather did not handle at all, a character should go to show you how much I absolutely love the character of Deathstroke. And that is probably one of my very few gripes with the DCAU, is that they never even attempted to include this character in any storyline. At least they did include Deadshot to a degree in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. It wasn't in any great capacity. I believe he did only appear in 4 episodes, and those 4 episodes he didn't do anything major outside of trying to kill Aquaman. But speaking on that, this could also give us more context as to that scene, and that scene and exchange between Batman and Deadshot. As many of you know, if you have seen that 2-part episode from Justice League the Animated Series, Floyd Lawton does attempt to kill Aquaman. And after this happens, the Justice League tries to interrogate him. And obviously, Deadshot is not going to talk to any of them. Deadshot is a hired gun. And one of the things about him is he has some integrity. So he won't just give up the person who did hire him. However, this is when we do see Batman approach, takes Deadshot on a little walk, says he has one thing to say to him, and within literal seconds, Deadshot starts spilling everything about who hired him. So this could offer us a pretty cool avenue to go down, with Batman not only having his first encounter with Deadshot in this second season of The New Adventures of Batman, but it could also offer us an explanation as to not only what Batman said to Deadshot in Justice League, but it could offer a way for Batman to find out that information. And the information I'm talking about is something that Kevin Conroy did mention a few years back, where he did say in that moment that he was told from the writers that Batman did say something to Deadshot regarding Floyd Lawton's daughter, which obviously, as many of us may know, the one thing Deadshot cares about more than his integrity and more than not ratting people out is his daughter. He will do anything and everything for his daughter. So that could be a pretty big moment between Batman and Deadshot. It could explain how Batman knows who Deadshot is. Maybe he captured him in this second season, and maybe by doing that, he did more research on this character of Deadshot and found out he actually had a daughter. And this could just help to tie things into Justice League a little bit better. Again, I'm someone who constantly sings the praises of the DCAU, but a little bit more connectivity would have gone a long way. And speaking of that, I feel like covering more of how the dynamic duo really did have a fallout would have helped a lot of fans. Obviously, we know Nightwing cameos in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. However, it is in an alternate universe, and when it is in their universe, he literally appears as a silhouette and nothing more. And aside from that, we don't get anything but some name mentions about him in Nightwing. And all we know is that they did have a much worse falling out, much worse than we have ever seen. So the fact that we never got to see anything between them and their ultimate demise as a duo is a real big shame. Again, that's one of the few gripes that I do have with the amazing universe that is the DCAU. Now, I'm not saying that they should go in there and cover the stories that were necessarily shown in those Batman Beyond comics. If you do not know what I mean, go check out my Downfall of the Dynamic Duo video. It'll be in there. But basically, it is covering the affair that happened in the trio of Nightwing, Batgirl, and Batman. So I'm not saying they have to do anything like that, because by that point they were already starting to fracture much more. So I think they could just start to show those fractures even more so in this second season. Show Nightwing wanting to be more on his own and be more of his own hero versus someone who is still very much so in the shadow of the Bat. We do see that even in season 1 of the New Adventures of Batman. So I feel like maybe taking 1 or 2 episodes for Nightwing to go off on his own, maybe have it centered around Nightwing, and you might not even need Batman in those first two episodes, it could show Nightwing not only leaving Gotham and leaving Batman, but going off and establishing himself in a new city, establishing himself in Bloodhaven, and maybe he makes some chance encounters. Now, I'm not saying introduce the Teen Titans and go down that whole route, but there are some other characters that it would make sense for him to meet, and it would be really cool to see him then interact with those characters. Another thing that I think would be really cool would be to do something with the Joker and Harley Quinn. Now, I know they do appear a ton in the original animated series and even in the New Adventures of Batman. However, where they leave off is kind of odd because their last appearance, depending on what you watch it on, is either in the Creeper episode or in Mad Love. Either way, I feel like neither of those really bookend the characters that well, and especially given what happens in Batman Beyond Return of the Joker, I feel like giving some type of bookend would have been really cool. Obviously, we know it can't be anything major because he does appear in Justice League the Animated Series. That being said, one really cool tie-in that I was thinking about was him securing and acquiring the technology that would later be used on Tim Drake. This could have given us a really cool storyline in which maybe Batman does defeat him. However, whatever technology he did steal and did work on for however many episodes this arc does go on, incorporate that technology that the Joker did inevitably use to clone himself and clone his DNA onto Tim Drake. However, still manages to keep that technology away from Batman for the next time he inevitably does break out of Arkham. So that could then tie into what happens in Batman Beyond Return of the Joker via the flashbacks and the Joker dying, then seemingly coming back to life through the medium of that technology that he does somewhat explain in Batman Beyond Return of the Joker. However, I feel like it would be really cool to see him actually acquiring some of that technology and playing the long game, knowing that he would lose that battle to Batman, whatever that battle is, could happen in this season. However, then we, the audience, would know inevitably he would realistically win because yes, he does end up dead, and yes, even Tim Drake ends up frying that little piece of tech. However, the emotional scars that the Joker is able to put on not only Bruce Wayne, but also Barbara Gordon and also Tim Drake are so immense that to him, I feel like that would be at the very least a partial victory. We do know that one of the Joker's biggest things and his biggest goals is to, in some way, bring Batman down to his level and make Batman suffer as much as he possibly can. Make it certain that Batman, no matter what, can never forget the Joker. Some of the other storylines that I do feel like would be really cool and for whatever reason just were not incorporated in this series would be something around Ra's al Ghul. As we know, he does appear in Superman the Animated Series. However, considering the fact that this series seems to take place during the events of Superman the Animated Series, you could still have some type of situation where you have Ra's al Ghul, where you have him maybe becoming in that weakened state that we do see him in the crossover episode with Superman. That would better explain it. That maybe shows him start to do research on this other person with great powers and maybe starts his fixation on someone other than Batman. That could be really, really cool and something I personally would really love to see. Outside of that, I feel like the only other group of villains that would be really cool to see would be the Court of Owls. I know there are characters who have been more popular in media, especially with the DCAM and how well they portrayed the Court of Owls. However, in this universe, I feel like the Court of Owls would have worked really, really well, especially because by this point, Rupert Thorne is no more. He was taken down in Batman Mystery of the Batwoman, the movie. So the fact that there is that large power vacuum could give us the opportunity to do a deeper dive into organized crime in Gotham City and maybe show us characters that we've seen and known for Batman the Animated Series and the New Adventures of Batman, and maybe even some that appeared in Superman the Animated Series, were actually part of the Court of Owls. And they were actually working behind the scenes for the downfall of of Gotham City. I just feel like that could be a really cool storyline, and I feel like that could be cool to see not only the dynamic duo reunite, because we know a lot of times traditionally Nightwing and Batman are the two that go face to face against Talon and his army of zombie Talons, but that could also be the storyline in which Nightwing does splinter off from Batman. So not only could you see the dynamic duo fighting together side by side once again, but you could also see that relationship become even more toxic to the point where they do have to go their separate ways. However, that is essentially all I can think of as to what could be in a second season of the New Adventures of Batman. However, let me know what all of you think. Which of the characters that I named would you have wanted to see most in the DCAU? And do you agree that a Batman versus Deathstroke is something that we desperately need? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And I'll see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.